Now let's start this thing off with what might be the most well-known beat-em-up out there, Final Fight. Originally released in the arcade back in 1989, Final Fight was later ported to the Super Nintendo in 1991. Early on in development, Capcom actually called this game Street Fighter 89 as a sequel to the 1987 release Street Fighter. Later they would change directions with the game and call it Final Fight. Set in Metro City, the mayor, Mike Hager, who is also an ex-professional wrestler, is on a mission to retrieve his daughter who was captured by the Mad Gear Street Gang. Along Mike's side is his daughter's boyfriend Cody, and a friend named Guy, who is absent from the SNES version. As a port from an arcade game, we know things aren't going to be exactly the same, but I feel like we lost a lot here during translation. As I mentioned, Guy did not make the final roster here. Along with this, we got enemy name changes, the removal of female opponents, enemies with darker skin tones were lightened. The list goes on. This doesn't mean that the game isn't great though, because it is. This is the perfect example of what a beat-em-up should be. Entertaining story, great controls, amazing graphics, and a good soundtrack. All help this game become very popular amongst beat-em-up fans. There was also a version released on the Sega CD which was an almost perfect arcade port. I used to own that version but ended up selling it along with a lot of other Sega CD stuff about 10 years ago. Gee, the things we do as dumb teenagers who need money. It also spawned a few sequels which were great, but the original Final Fight will always be my favorite, and while not perfect, this version more than represents the true fun that is Final Fight. Golden Axe was an early Genesis release, set in the fictional land of Uria. You control one of 3 town heroes as they fight to take their land back and rescue not only the captive king and princess, but the Golden Axe, which has been taken by the evil overlord known as Death Adder. You know when you were really young and you didn't have that many video games yet, so you played like 2 or 3 of them at an unhealthy rate? This was one of those games for me. I played this game like every time was my last. Lucky for me, Golden Axe is a very good game. You'll take on a number of different enemies in typical beat-em-up fashion. Well, I guess technically hack and slash action, but let's not get too literal. You have one main attack and a jump button, and a special attack which uses magic. You'll gather magic from these little creepy munchkin creatures that run around with bags filled with it. One of my favorite things is the fact that you can actually hop onto different fictional creatures like fire-breathing dragons and use them to attack your enemies. You will get knocked off of them quite a bit though, and to top it off, the enemies can use these creatures as well, so you'll be fighting hard to keep them off of them. Golden Axe can get a bit difficult when there's a lot going on at once, but ultimately it shouldn't be too hard to play through it all the way. The graphics are pretty decent for a 1989 release, and the music is actually really good. I've always been a big fan of the music from this game. This is a really good game, and it's a blast to play through with 2 players. Golden Axe 2 hit the Genesis 2 years later in 1991. Same storyline, different bad guys, same characters. Not a lot has changed, but that doesn't mean that this game is stale by any means. Where the first title succeeded, so did this one. Only this time around there were a few minor tweaks to gameplay. Most notably for me was the change of the magic system. In the first Golden Axe, when you hit your special attack, it used all of the magic you had at the time. In Golden Axe 2, you can hold the attack button to use the desired amount of magic, so if you want to conserve it for multiple attacks, you can do so. I always liked this a lot better. The graphics are pretty much the same. The sprites were changed slightly, but I don't feel like the graphics were really improved upon. I do, however, feel that the music is even better than the first, which was quite a hard task to top. This music really brings back memories from my childhood. My one gripe is probably the voice effects when an enemy dies. It just sounds like a drunk guy vomiting or something. If you're a fan of the first Golden Axe, I almost guarantee you will enjoy this one as well. They did release a third Golden Axe, but originally we never saw that here in the States. This time there's new characters, new moves, new story. It's definitely a true sequel, but I'm not a huge fan of this one. It's not that it's a bad game. I don't know, maybe it's because I didn't play it until nearly 20 years after its original release. One addition that was great was the game's junction points, where the path branches and you're forced to choose which way to go. Graphically, the sprites look a bit more detailed, but the backgrounds all look a little simple. The music is good, but nowhere near the first two games. This is a good game to have to complete your Golden Axe collection, but not something I would seek out by itself. Now, I feel like Rival Turf doesn't get the attention it deserves. Maybe because of its horrible box art. I don't know, but this is a great game in my opinion. Is it cheesy as hell? Yeah, it is, but that's part of the game's charm. The two characters you get to select from are Jack Flack and Uzi Nelson. Uzi Nelson just looks like a black M. Bison. Well, I guess they say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. Take either of these two through the streets of Los Angeles to find Jack's girlfriend, who's been kidnapped by Big Al, the leader of the notorious gang they call the Street Kings. You'll fight random street thugs and bosses as you get closer to finding Big Al's hideout. The game controls pretty well. It's a standard beat-em-up layout with attack and jump. The sprites look decent, but I think the backgrounds are where the presentation shines. They did a really good job bringing the city to life, from alleys to baseball stadiums and even rooftops. I really like the way this game looks. Not a lot of games are going to be Final Fight or Streets of Rage quality, and I'm not saying this game is. I'm just saying it's a lot better than some people may lead you to believe. If you have an SNES and you're looking to satisfy that beat-em-up bug, definitely give this game a shot. Comix Zone hit the Genesis a bit late in its life in 1995, but damn, this is just such a cool game. You play as an artist from New York City named Sketch Turner. One night during a thunderstorm, Sketch is working on his new comic book when out of nowhere a lightning strike manages to bring Mortis, the book's main villain, into the real world, sending Sketch into his comic. Now Mortis is drawing a world of chaos in the book's pages in an attempt to kill Sketch. The story's a bit goofy, but I mean, who cares really? I mean, look at this game. You have basic attacks along with special items that can be used for different outcomes and sometimes for specific locations. This game takes advantage of the 6-button controller, so you'll want to use it if you got it. Visually, this game is very impressive. It's extremely colorful with great art and very smooth animations. I always thought this was the best looking Genesis title as a kid. This is a very tough game though, and because of that, I think it didn't get as much praise as it should have. One area this game did get praise was its soundtrack. This game has some great music. Comix Zone has a bit of a cult following, and for good reason. This is a very good game, and I highly recommend giving it a try. There's been quite a few Batman titles since as far back as I can remember actually. Some good, some not, but Batman Returns for the SNES is one of the good ones. Now Konami decided to go beat 'em up route on this one, and I'm glad they did, so I can put it in this video. You'll play as Batman tearing through the streets of Gotham on a serious ass-kicking mission. The game even features a driving level where you'll pilot the Batmobile through the streets whilst shooting enemies. Each of the 7 scenes contains a boss battle, and these can get quite difficult. I like the fact that you have access to some of Batman's gadgets, which will help you in different ways throughout the levels. I really like the graphics in this game. The shading looks great on everything, and even though it's a bit cartoony, it still has that darker feel that the movie had. The sprites are nice and large, and the backgrounds are very detailed. My only real complaint at times is the difficulty, but it doesn't take away from the fun to be had here. This game kind of slipped past me as a kid. I don't really remember playing it, but after finding it recently, I wish I would have played this as a kid, as I loved Batman and loved beat-em-ups. I guess I probably stayed away from it as it was a game based on a movie, and those rarely turned out to be any good. In any event, if you're a Batman fan, or even if you're not, but you can appreciate a good beat-em-up, you really need to check out Batman Returns. On the SNES, that is. The Genesis version is a completely different game.